Identical.
Hey guys, it's Matt. This is the reading for chapter 14 coming soon. Whenever my opening remarks are going to be really long, I will put the time the chapter reading starts. But in most cases, I'll keep the introduction here short, and I hope you will watch it because the introductory remarks I think is really important no matter how trivial the section or the chapter coming is. This is a more fun and trivial chapter. It's the juicy conspiracy so many people have been waiting for. This is about the fraudulent story of the Titanic. And even if you think you know all about the Titanic really being the Olympic and the whole story, a few of you do. I bet I found a few things you might not have known, or at least a different take on part of the story. Also, a note to those, please don't get frustrated with me. The Federal Reserve aspect of the Titanic fairy tale will come a little bit later. So the first part, people have the tendency to go, he's missing the whole point about the Federal Reserve. I get to that. I get to everything. Don't worry. I get to that. Now, this is, like I've said, the juicy kind of fun conspiracy that a lot of people have been waiting for. And I do a lot of this throughout the book. It has not been part of the lead-in, and I actually moved this up a bit because I didn't think I could do any more of what I was doing without delivering this sort of thing for the people that want this sort of thing. Either way, it's a fun exercise. And that is the way to go about, when I present this just ridiculous, sensational conspiracy about what really may have happened or likely happened with the Titanic. The best way to go about it, again, is just to have fun with it. This level of conspiracy, we should have fun with it. And the cumulative takeaway from all of these conspiracies, it just never forget the cumulative aspect of it, where after we hear the 100th story, like the one I'm about to present, we go, how could they keep pulling this off all the time? Somewhat successfully. A few of us notice, but that's part of the mystery or the riddle of this reality, where if you put just hundreds and hundreds of examples back and they've pulled off a fraud of some kind, a history is presented to us that really didn't happen. And when you put 100 of these things back to back, at some point, I'd like people to use that to gauge a different framework on reality itself. After the 100th conspiracy, like what I'm about to present, I would hope people go, something else is going on here, because you just can't keep pulling this shit off all the time. And every single time we look into something, a significant moment in history, every single time we look into it, it turns out to be some sort of a fraud. Well, how's that possible? It becomes, like I've said too many times, it becomes a reality breakdown in and of itself. If you look at the Titanic story in isolation, then it's just something interesting that the rich guys, J.P. Morgan, pulled off, and it makes sense how they used it to squash the dissenting voices of the Federal Reserve. It only becomes something more, this type of conspiracy, if you line it up back to back to back with 100 other stories like it. Then you say, no way, something else is going on here. So it's important to not take these in isolation. I don't know if that message got across correctly, but I'll keep trying to clarify that point the best I can. But this one's fun. Sit back, it's Friday night, grab a beer, grab a drink, and I've put the story together the best I could, and I hope, let's just enjoy this level of nutty conspiracy. We deserve a break today, right? McDonald's, we're just going to enjoy this one. See ya.
Identical.
Did you know that the RMS Titanic had an identical twin? Identical, says the prosecutor and my cousin Vinny. The Titanic's sister ship was called the Olympic and was the first of the two built and the first of the two put to sea. The Titanic and the Olympic were the property of J.P. Morgan's White Star Line. Shortly after the Olympic set sail, right after she was just put in the water, she was severely damaged in an accident with a British Navy warship. The Olympic was temporarily patched and limped back to Belfast, Ireland for more permanent repairs. When she arrived back in port, the damage was assessed as very severe. The very frame of the ship was damaged, and it would take far more than a simple welding crew to initiate and complete repairs. All the work on the Titanic, still under construction, still being built, was put on hold. In fact, for her repairs, the Olympic was placed in a berth right next to the Titanic. To speed repairs, the Titanic's propeller was actually pirated off the Titanic and fitted onto the Olympic, which got the Olympic back in the water a bit sooner than expected. However, Olympic's bad luck did not change, and there were more problems, this time with the engine. The most important thing to remember at this point is Olympic was identical to the Titanic. The second most important thing is Olympic was built first, and she was put to sea and carrying passengers for months, almost a year, while Titanic was still out of water being completed. Now take a moment to remember all you've ever been told about this legendary Titanic story, about how grand Titanic was. You remember learning about her maiden voyage, that nothing ever put in the water in history could rival Titanic's magnificence. She stood alone, a one-of-a-kind marvel, the greatest ship in the world, and blah, blah, blah. We've all heard this stuff over and over our entire lives. Let me ask you this. How could any of that have been true if Titanic had a sister ship, identical, put to sea almost a year before, and the ship was built to be the same exact thing as Titanic, right down to the linens, plates, and silverware? You see what I'm getting at? If Titanic's twin had been steaming around the Atlantic for almost a year, well, who gives a shit about Titanic's maiden voyage then? And how could it have been such a big deal? How could she have been so grand and the biggest news story in the world? That's what we're told. When construction in Nevada ended, the Hoover Dam was considered a modern marvel of engineering. Even today, almost 100 years later, it's incredibly impressive to visit. The sheer amount of concrete alone in the Hoover Dam is mind-boggling. The ribbon cutting was quite a celebration in 1936, and deservedly so. But what if Hoover Dam had a twin? A dam, say, in California had opened 6 months to a year before, called the Olympic Dam. Would the construction of Hoover Dam then, just outside of Las Vegas, have been such a big deal if there was already one in California generating electricity that's considered the Hoover Dam's twin? Would people have talked about Hoover as standing alone and one of a kind on the cover of Life magazine if this was the case? Of course not. The unimaginable conspiracy that's about to be presented is validated in the bits and pieces of historical record that still remain. Yet it's also the version that makes the most common sense to anybody listening with an open mind. We've been taught to toss out common sense and bow down to the official story. These two main points are the focus here. If Titanic had an identical twin already sailing the seas, 1. Why is Titanic constantly discussed as a unique technological breakthrough of the time and the grandest ship in the world when it wasn't? 2. How is it possible almost nobody's ever heard of the sister ship, the Olympic? Identical. The fact that the existence of the sister ship has been removed from history, for the most part, validates everything that follows. This is likely the real story of Titanic below. Remember, the Olympic had a string of horrible luck. The major accident with the naval warship was just one of several mishaps that plagued her. Although masters of the universe like J.P. Morgan were shareholders of White Star Line, it's well documented that White Star had serious financial difficulty. See, business moguls commit a fixed amount of their precious money to investments, and when investments go bad, they walk away and they limit their exposure. It's not contradictory to say White Star Line was in financial desperation while it was backed by one of the richest men in the world. Billionaires don't put up personal fortunes to save failing companies. They are ruthless in that regard. These demons don't attach themselves to anything. And when businesses go bad, they walk away. So I know people are saying, well, how could they have been in such financial disarray if J.P. Morgan was involved? Well, that's the reason. Also, please realize, because of the damage and its past misfortune, the Olympic no longer carried the insurance value that it did on the day it was berthed to sea. So imagine being a terrified shareholder in White Star Line, standing on the dock in Belfast, Ireland, staring up at your two main ships, both out of water. One was being built, the other repaired. There they sat, the Olympic in front of you, right next to the Titanic. And as a shareholder in White Star Line, all you can think about is how impossible it is to make a profit with your two golden geese out of the water. And remember, Olympic was a mess. It wasn't just about waiting a few weeks and she would be as good as new, or waiting for that one little welding crew to come in. Her inner structure was permanently mashed by a British naval warship, one that is able to actually ram or ice break. No matter how great the repairs, they knew, those investors, they knew that she was permanently tainted and would never be quite the same. So, what did they likely do in financial desperation? They simply switched the names on the ships and sent Olympic out, posing as Titanic, in order to sink the piece of shit and collect the insurance money. Yes, this theory contends that she was sunk on purpose, but it wasn't Titanic. There was likely no iceberg incident with Titanic. It wasn't even Titanic. It was Olympic. Now, this could have been accomplished far more easily than people think. The ships were almost identical. Even the dishes and linens were standard White Star Line issue. The maiden voyage of Titanic was really Olympic, set sail in disguise. Again, this would have to mean that she was sunk on purpose. Now, it's a bit confusing right now, I know, but we'll work through it. The Titanic did not sink. The Titanic was back in dry dock in Belfast, being completed. Now, with the name Olympic on her, after the switch. The Olympic, now with the name Titanic, set sail for her, Titanic's maiden voyage across the Atlantic, and the story we've heard so much about. Then, what a coincidence! The grandest and most expensive ship in all the world just happened to go down to the bottom of the Atlantic after being in operation for 4 whole days, when every other rusty ship and tugboat that operates throughout the North Atlantic for about 30 years goes without incident. What's your threshold? Believing the most advanced and grandest ship in all the world would sink on her first voyage should push anyone's limit on coincidence. It didn't. People lined up at the movie theater in 1998 to push the box office receipts to all-time records. All you have to do is wrap a fake story with a decent Celine Dion song, and all is well. By the way, Jack's Italian friend in the movie, who plays, I think his name is Maurizio, in the beginning, during that card game where he wins his ticket on Titanic, has such a pathetically overacted Italian accent, it's almost embarrassing. Italian-American groups should have been outraged at the way the Italians were portrayed in the movie. I'm telling you, how pathetic as that is, I just did it better than that guy in the movie. Well, why was it done? On the surface it seems clear, because Titanic carried full reimbursement insurance money. Note, I've learned in this reality if something seems clear-cut, it's usually not, and I'll discuss this at the end of the section. But a brand new Titanic carried a $12 million replacement value that a beaten-up Olympic could no longer command. This is no different than the insurance value on a brand new Lexus just driven off the lot versus the same Lexus, say, that's been through 3 Buffalo, New York winters. It was also likely done because Olympic was so messed up she could not be restored to her original condition, no matter what they did. No doubt many will think this is just crazy conspiracy theory. But if you really think about it, doesn't this story make more sense than the fairy tale presented by, quote, Jack and Rose in the movie and everywhere else we've heard about the Titanic? This account of events explains a lot. Tap your inner knowing, not what puppet anchormen spew from their teleprompters. Now that you know all the facts, the story we're told all our lives doesn't add up, does it? Don't forget the most important point of all. How come we've never heard of the Olympic? And why was the Titanic, the grandest ship in all the world, unrivaled? How's that possible, when Olympic had been sailing for almost a year? Having proved this part of the Titanic story is 100% a lie by itself, basically kills the Titanic fairy tale. Now, this fact is so important, just one more time. People are still now saying, well, Olympic couldn't have been as nice as Titanic. Yes, it was as nice as Titanic. It was nearly identical. Some have said there were a few minor differences in a few port windows and a few other tiny details. See, a ship the size of the Titanic does not come off a Chinese Foxconn assembly line like Pokemon stuffed animals. 100,000-ton twins are not going to be 100% exact in the early 1900s because of how materials are sourced back then, but they were intended to be the same. To me, it's likely that whole story about how grand Titanic was is simply the needed cooked-up news headline designed to protect what really happened and to get people to forget that there ever was an Olympic, one sailing a whole year before Titanic had its maiden voyage. And look how successful they were. You could stand in the park all day long and every passing person will tell you the same parroted story about Titanic. Grandest ship in the world, grandest ship in the world, and the same bullcrap. Not one person in the park, not one, will be able to tell you a damn thing about the sister ship, Olympic. They will have never heard of the Olympic. That tells you all you need to know about this fairy tale, doesn't it? Now here's even more information that suggests that Titanic was in fact Olympic. What a coincidence that the primary shareholder of White Star Line, J.P. Morgan himself, and several of his business associates canceled their reservations or simply did not board Titanic's maiden voyage. Yeah, right. J.P. Morgan claimed illness, but a few days later was supposedly spotted at a French resort. Isn't a big part of the Titanic story all about the hoopla and the anticipation about Titanic's maiden voyage? We're told everybody wanted to be on board. In the movie, wasn't Jack so lucky to win that ticket in the card game with his fake Italian friend Maurizio? Think about some of the other scenes with Leonardo DiCaprio descending that famous staircase to dine with Rose. If J.P. Morgan, an American, just happened to be in Europe, which he was in Europe, one would think he would want to be on the maiden voyage of Titanic. Oh yeah, I forgot. It was his ship. And in that, we know he had confirmed. We know J.P. Morgan had a confirmed reservation on board. Well, why wouldn't he? It's his ship. Anybody being honest with their common sense knows that something else happened that night. For all we know, J.P. Morgan was in Europe specifically to ride Titanic until the sinister plan was presented to him. You think it was hard to convince J.P. Morgan to go along with a plot like this? It's like offering up a virgin wrist to Lestat. But there's even more to the story. We all know of the famous captain of the Titanic, Captain Smith, and how he went down with the ship as a valiant captain. This is all BS as well, and part of the script. Again, we're told that this was Titanic's maiden voyage. So one must logically ask, what ship was Smith the captain of prior to Titanic's first sailing? Can you guess? The Olympic, of course. So let me get this straight. The man who had 3 previous major incidents/accidents with the Olympic, putting White Star Line itself into financial ruin, a man of incompetence, probably a drunk, he was rewarded with the hugely publicized Titanic, the grandest ship in all the world. Really? The skipper of the USS Minnow with Gilligan would have been more qualified than Smith. Agent Smith would have been a better choice than Captain Smith. El Capitan Smith would never have been rewarded with Titanic after messing up the Olympics so bad. The guy who started the Great Chicago Fire getting the job as fire marshal for the city of San Francisco, which is actually possible if he was the only transgender applicant. Okay, let's just go along with the official story and assume that Smith's incompetence was actually rewarded with Titanic's maiden voyage. Now, after all his past incidents that Smith had with Olympic, was the captain a bit timid behind Titanic's wheel? Was he extra careful to avoid yet another incident on his drunken record? Of course not. We're told that Smith charged literally full steam ahead, with Titanic's boilers and engines pushing their very limits to generate a new speed record. Is that what a captain with 3 prior incidents would do, in your opinion? We all know the end of the story, but remember, it's a fairy tale. That's all. History is his story. Because Smith was moving too fast, the crash into the iceberg could not be avoided. It's all very convenient how this story puts a nice little bow on everything. There's even the ridiculous permutations of the story that talked about the binoculars being locked away so the crew couldn't see the iceberg until it was too late. The binoculars being locked away. None of the trolls working in the boiler rooms down there had a welder's kit or a wrench or a crowbar to free the binoculars from their tin lockbox. Also, how do you explain this? There was an inexplicable delay in Titanic sending her SOS, as well as starting the emergency seawater pumps. Well, it's not really that hard to explain if one believes they wanted to sink Olympic on purpose. Is that why she sunk so quickly? Think about it. Remember how quickly we were told it sank? It's almost like no one was trying to keep her afloat. They probably weren't. We all know the story of Titanic's lifeboats only being half full, right? Well, ask yourself this. What's more likely? That half-full lifeboats went out, or there simply wasn't that many passengers on board Titanic/Olympic? Perhaps you feel the official story makes more sense. That all the professionals working on board White Star Lines simply had no idea how to fill lifeboats properly, putting thousands on board at risk. If in fact there was a plot to sink Olympic and call her Titanic for the insurance money, it would make sense that the lesser owners of White Star Line didn't completely lose all their morals or conscience, saying, screw it. We don't care if everybody dies, as long as we get our insurance money. Sure, demon masters of the universe like J.P. Morgan probably would have been able to sleep at night, but there were other people involved in this plot, other investors. To have the ship as empty as possible for what was being plotted made more sense for a lot of reasons. This may have been why lifeboats were only half filled. Who knows, maybe up to 1,000 people that wanted to go aboard, quote, Titanic, may have been told it was sold out, when in fact it was not. It makes logical sense that you would want as few people on board as possible, because one more person on board is another potential loss of life, which some people, I know many people listening will disagree with this, but some people involved in the plot actually would have cared about that. They're not all demons from the ninth plane of hell, okay? Even if you think J.P. Morgan is. With a plot like this, it just seems like the number of potential passengers on board they would have wanted to be kept to a minimum. It just makes it easier to corroborate a fake story. For example, a passenger may observe something unusual or speak to the press, or perhaps they may find something on board, quote, Titanic, pointing to the fact that she was really Olympic. Who knows? On the other side of the coin, when you bring in reporters to cover Titanic's maiden voyage, you can't send out a ship with empty decks, can you? There has to be a balance of enough people to not raise suspicion while having as few people as possible, quote, during the sinking. Again, think about it. Do you believe the trained staff couldn't fill lifeboats properly when everybody knows that's part of the official story? If they were half full, as the story says, the only explanation, in my opinion, is the boat was half empty. I mean, how basic, easy, and straightforward is it to fill lifeboats? Okay, that's 8 on board. Lower down, lower down. Wait, sir, these lifeboats can hold up to 16 passengers. The ship's sinking. Shut up, Porter. These people are VIPs and they deserve to stretch their legs. 8's fine. Lower her down. Now that ridiculous segment is like the only way anybody can explain half-filled lifeboats. Yes, it's far more likely that the BS story we've heard our entire lives is just that. The Olympic masquerading as Titanic was sunk on purpose for the insurance money. There are other reasons, by the way, I'll get to that. Final part of this story is the inquiry into what happened after the fact. If it happened in modern times, of course, Congress would have loved to conduct a big dog and pony show that would have, as usual, accomplished nothing. For the White Star Lines, there was a big investigation, but no one was found liable or punished. Surprised? Me neither. Final recap of events is warranted. Olympic was a patchwork, damaged mess after her accidents. It was said she would never be the same again. It was reported by eyewitnesses that after the main repair, she was said to, quote, list a bit to the port side. In this sense, list means lean. Almost all medium and small sized ships and sailboats lean a bit to one side or another based on wind direction and the placement of cargo. But massive luxury liners don't lean. Of course, on the biggest and grandest ocean liner in the world, a permanent list is extremely embarrassing. That's like Moscow's top ballerina with an opening night limp. Come pay top dollar, you rich devils, to ride the Olympic across the Atlantic. But don't bring your marbles, game. She permanently leans to the North Pole as we sail west. And finally, remember the reason for most of the nefarious schemes of this world from time immemorial? Money. No man has ever done anything bad for the sake of money throughout all of history, have they? Yeah. Both Titanic and Olympic cost roughly $10 million to build. We find that Titanic was actually overinsured for about $12 million. Wow, where have we seen that Silverstein strategy before? The payoff was too alluring for White Star Line to pass up. Sink a 3-time repaired lemon that leaned to port, call it Titanic, and get a big fat Lloyd's of London payout for more than the replacement cost of the ship. Then a few weeks later, take, quote, Olympic out of repair in Belfast and put her to sea. Remember, because this can get confusing, that after the Titanic sank, which was really Olympic, the real Titanic was put to sea pretending to be a repaired Olympic. And of course, what a fine job they did in the repairs. Olympic was now perfect, of course, because there were no repairs at all. A fixed Olympic was just the brand new Titanic. And what a coincidence that the Olympic, really Titanic, had a 25-year service life after the incident. Could such a damaged ship have served 25 more years? It was also rumored that the Titanic's insurance amount was increased just 5 days before the incident. That insurance fraud maneuver is also called a Silverstein. When the surviving crewmen returned home to Europe, they were held for 24 hours in some sort of warehouse. One wonders what was said to them in that warehouse. Perhaps they were held in isolation and taught how to create a hangman's noose with 8 feet of rope for fun to pass the time. The crewmen got the message. Nobody talked. Nobody said shit. Unbelievably, there's another conspiracy about Titanic to present. There's actually another reason to sink the ship on purpose, whether the ship was Titanic, Olympic, or even a duck boat. It has to do with the Federal Reserve of the United States. The Titanic sunk on April 15th, 1912. Of course, our tax day. The Federal Reserve was established on December 23rd, 1913. But that's just the official date of the congressional vote. We know the Jekyll Island meeting, which laid out the plan for establishing the Fed, was in November of 1910. But how does the Titanic incident relate to the Federal Reserve of the Corporation of the United States? It turns out the super rich people who died on Titanic just happened to be the exact billionaires who opposed the establishment of the Federal Reserve. What a coincidence. Those billionaires and business moguls who favored establishing a new central bank did not board Titanic, including the primary beneficiary of the Federal Reserve, J.P. Morgan himself, and as mentioned, a part owner of Titanic. A member of the Vanderbilt family also did not get on board Titanic, but was due to board, although he was not the most senior and richest Vanderbilt in the world at the time, more of a younger playboy type. But it wouldn't have been hard for Uncle Vanderbilt to get him an encrypted message that said in big bold letters, "Don't board that ship tomorrow, nephew." It may have said that after young Vanderbilt decoded it with his little orphan Andy decoder ring. So the 3 richest people in the world who opposed the Federal Reserve and its establishment subsequently died on Titanic: John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus. John Jacob Astor also got a coded wire telegram as well the day before boarding Titanic, but his said, "Be sure to drink your Ovaltine." These men were said to have been returning to the United States on Titanic to oppose the Federal Reserve in upcoming meetings and to lean on the hundreds of congressmen in their pockets to do the same thing about it. What are the chances of all these things just coming together? What's your threshold? Now, these names mean very little to us because it was a past era, but these were the biggest men of their time, those that died on Titanic. What if there were new laws coming to be passed or about to be passed regarding the internet, and Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and Steve Jobs all went down on the same airplane? How many of you would actually be applauding? But that's not the point. Either way, whether the decision to enact the scheme was dictated by Fed opposition or the insurance money itself out of greed, any degree of common sense says the ship was sunk on purpose, whether it was Titanic or Olympic. No iceberg accident. That's the dumbed down story for the profane idiots. Leonardo DiCaprio movie, as is standard practice, is used to pour a new layer of cement over an already hardened fairy tale. So if conspiracy theorists like me try to crack the old porcelain, we're even further ridiculed. Now that a movie was made, history is forever sealed about the Titanic. The movie makes it all so believable that these billionaires could perish because of chivalry, of course. They all let obnoxious Kathy Bates types on the lifeboats and they perish themselves. Ridiculous. Just a few minutes of applying common sense and really thinking hard about, quote, how it would have gone down if things were real, reveals another aspect of the fairy tale. Sure, John Jacob Astor and 2 other billionaires perished because of half-full lifeboats and letting the women and children go first. John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt would have had enough clout to get into a lifeboat, let alone John Jacob Astor. In desperation, the 3 richest men in the world would have offered a few $1,000,000 to the guys manning the lifeboats, and that would have been that. One of them would have taken the money and they would have boarded a lifeboat. The movie Titanic potentially revealed the truth when it showed exactly what the richest star of the movie did. Billy Zane, who played Cal in the movie, fake wig and all, was trying to pay off everybody he came across to manipulate the circumstances, if you remember. To me, in the movie, Billy Zane's thug with the gun probably told us exactly what happened to these 3 billionaires who opposed the Federal Reserve. Remember Jack handcuffed to the water pipe as the ship was sinking and Rose was trying to find an axe as the water was rising? Well, that's probably what happened to Astor, Guggenheim, and Strauss. Truth in movies, lies in the news. That's an RV quote, and respecta to RV from Staines. We also have the date itself, April 15th, now tax day, coincidentally related to a conspiracy that involves the Federal Reserve. Really? I won't go into it at length, it's too soon, but if you understand how the world works, things like this are no accident. A historical ass-kicking may be in order here for a certain type of reader. Amazingly, there will be a few people who are actually saying to me right now, "No way, no one is that sinister to send people to their death over insurance money." Anyone who would even think that for a microsecond has no idea the type of monsters who have run this world from time immemorial. One of the certainties in life is the leaders of this world, with rare exception, have been worse than the antagonist of most horror movies. During the, quote, Cultural Revolution of China, Mao Zedong killed over 50 million people. That's 50 million to you and me. And Obama jovially hung Mao's image on his Saturnalia tree. One cold winter, Stalin starved out about 7 million Ukrainians. You think he lost sleep over that? Not a wink. The United States is responsible for the deaths of millions and millions of, quote, Indians or Native Americans. The Catholic Church has killed tens of millions in his name over the centuries, minimum. You're right. There is no possible way the monsters who run this world would risk the deaths of innocent passengers for financial gain. That would never happen. Something like that has never happened before in history. What? People have actually said this to me regarding 9/11, that nobody died. Yeah, like the Larry Silverstein monster and the Pentagon monsters and whatever monster George Bush really reported to are such champions of human life that they made certain all the floors were 100% empty before bringing down the towers. That would be 3,000 families, including my personal friend George McLaughlin from New Jersey, who would have to be in on it. And these 3,000 fake deaths then probably joined Elvis and Allison Parker on that part of the earth called Elysium, where only the elite can go. If you haven't noticed, the people who sit behind the curtain love death. The 3,000 death count associated with 9/11 may be light. Let's say you wanted to disappear somebody, anybody. Putting them in the trade centers that day is a great way to do it, don't you think? It leaves no trace. Think about it. I'm not saying this happened. I understand in these presentations I'm throwing around a lot of shit. A lot of it will be wrong. However, I am confident that this is generally the correct way to think about these types of things. No matter what I'm wrong about, this line of thinking gets one closer to the truth than, say, CNN. No, that statement's inaccurate. It implies CNN is trying to get to the truth and I'm just doing a better job. It's incorrect. CNN's very intention is to mislead. For any big topic, they are in no way ever trying to get to the truth.